do us a quick favor, guys. Hit the follow, subscribe button. Share this with someone who would benefit from it. And help us grow, as the more we grow, the better the episodes we'll get. Thanks, guys, for helping us. And let's get into the episode.
Working with the YDP, one of the challenges we have when we're trying to manage our training load week to week, we know what they're doing here in the building. We've got GPS on them when they're going out on the pitch, etc. We know what they're doing in the gym, but on the days off, we don't know what they're doing. It's one of the challenges we do find here. How do we sort of take that into account outside the building that they're doing that sort of leads to an injury or anything like that? We just don't know what they're doing.
And he's here. He is here. Cristiano has entered the building. Welcome, wherever you are, to the Old Trafford Theatre.
Yes, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Sculpted podcast. Today, we have Kai on today, and it's an absolute honour for us to get him on. It's going to be a really great insight today where we can delve into a mind of someone who's very experienced in the areas of, strength and conditioning, injury prevention, all of these valuable insights for our listeners today where they can take their game to the next level, help them stay in the game for a bit longer, whether it's the small details of strength training, whether it's the small details of athleticism, whether it's, trying to work on not getting injured as much as possible, because injury is a massive thing for young athletes, and to stay at the top level, you got to stay playing the game. You got to stay doing what you need to do, and injuries are a massive setback that can keep you out of the game. So today we're really excited to get into this episode with Kai. And Kai, if you can give us a quick introduction to yourself, a bit of background, what you do, who you stand for, and just a bit of background for our listeners.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Nicholas. So yeah, as you mentioned, my name's Kai, currently a strength and conditioning coach at Everton Football Club, working in the Youth Academy. Recently just finished my master's degree in strength and conditioning, so sort of my second year in full-time football, worked at Everton alongside my master's degree, and then sort of came full-time here, working mainly with the YDP, so under 13 to under 16, doing all the gym work, strength power work, and then also the on-pitch stuff, so whether that be the speed, agilities type work. So yeah, first full year in football, enjoying it as much as I can. Been enjoyable so far.
Excellent. And out of curiosity, how long has that taken you to actually finish all of your degrees?
5 years all in all, so 4 years for my undergrad and then a year for my master's degree. So I've done my undergrad in science and football at John Moores University, and then I've done my master's in strength and conditioning at the same university. So all in all 5 years.
Wow,
long time.
That is a long time. I think. So the main, at school, for example, what subjects did you choose that were helping you get that degree?
In high school?
Yeah.
So in high school I did my A-levels were in sport, psychology, and then history, which is a bit of a mad one. But mainly me sport and psychology were the ones that got me into my undergrad in sport science. Okay,
so with the psychology one, did you find that there was much correlation between the psychology of aspect and the aspect of strength and conditioning, or was that kind of not too related?
We didn't really do much psychology in our master's degree. It was more based around like training methodologies, etc. More strength and conditioning work, but it's something that I have used in my day-to-day job at the minute. We have a psychologist here, so it's good to have chats with him about some of the stuff I sort of learned in the A-level. Some of the stuff, he's obviously more knowledgeable than me in psychology, but yeah, it's good to have a little chat about it from time to time, and it helps my practitioner as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. I really believe that going for anyone in whatever area of life, what they want to pursue, I think that doing, creating that level of awareness and knowledge of psychology is actually quite an important aspect, just to understand how the brain works. I think there's a lot of benefits for anyone to really understand, how you can create patterns, how you can create development from yourself, and all these different ways of, I guess, understanding more about you. I think that's an important thing for anyone to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I took from it as well is certain learning behaviours, how people learn, especially working with young athletes. A lot of people learn in different ways. Someone might be visual, someone might be verbal. So challenging my practice in a way to make sure everyone's learning in the best way they can. That's one thing I took away from my psychology A level, definitely, and use it today still.
Yeah, I think it'd definitely be interesting even to see with younger kids, just to understand how maybe it's a more raw perspective of, seeing how even different techniques of speaking with kids, maybe some kids,
Yeah.
they don't want what you say. Some kids that, like a sponge, they're just absorbing everything you say. I think it might help you in your career, whether you work your way up through Everton or whether you go through another path in sports. It's going to help you no matter what, just having that second kind of perspective on human psychology, I think. But with that being said, I think if we go into the first kind of compartment of the episode of how do we get an injury, and what I want to mainly focus on for the first section of even this is what is an injury at the most raw level, and how do we get to that point in terms of, is it a consequence of doing too much? Is it a consequence of doing too little in some areas? How do we get to that point of actually being injured?
I think it can be both. So if you're doing too much, over time you're accumulating too much load, start to become fatigued, and then you can sort of result in an injury. But also at the same time, if you're not doing enough and your body's not adapted to the demands of the sport, etc., and then you sort of come in and you get that spike in your acute loads, that can again cause an injury. So I think in both circumstances, not doing enough and then doing too much can result in an injury. Like sort of them fluctuations in training loads, they can be associated with an increased risk in injury. So if you're not doing much and then you come back into the program and all of a sudden your load spikes up by however much, that can cause an injury. So I think in both what you're saying there, in both ways, can have a negative impact on performance and also injury.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I kind of have a question about is the so-and-so load management. I think that's something that's quite relevant. Mainly, I think the higher levels of professional football, something that I have observed through being with different teams at different levels. Like, for example, at Sydney FC, my old team in Australia, this is arguably one of the biggest teams in the country, and they take quite a lot of attention and focus onto player loads and things like this. But then if you go to the team that I'm with currently in Germany, who is maybe the 60th best team in Germany, still professional, but if you look at them, they only do their the app's called XPS, but it's your RPE essentially. That's all you do.
Okay.
And even then, I don't actually think that the strength and conditioning coach tailors our training too much and differs it too much by the RPE, which is interesting. I think that from, club to club, it does vary. But how do you, as a strength and conditioning coach, actually tailor individuals' loads? Because I think that loads can change very, very much depending on position. For myself as a goalkeeper, I find that my load will be lower exertion-wise, but higher physically-wise. And what I mean by that, like when I'm throwing myself on the ground for 500 times in a day, when I do my second training session, maybe I could do a 5-kilometer run. But if I was to go do that same session that I did in the morning again in the evening, it's not going to be fun for me because my body, I'm feeling it. It's like a boxer almost. And how do you actually use loads to manage, and how do you see loads dictating performance?
So we sort of look at it with our academy players on a week-to-week basis. So at the end of every week, we will sort of get an overall view of the week, what each player's done, whether that be total distance, sprint distance, accel decels, and then we'll just look to see if they've passed that certain threshold. For us at the minute, it's probably around anything over 30 kilometres, we would say as a red flag, and say, okay, so he's passed 30 kilometres there, and then also with that, his high intensity metrics have also went up, so his sprint distances, accel decels, if they're all high, we would sort of flag that up with the coach and say, okay, he's had a high week here. For whatever reason, he could have played in 2 games, he could have been called up to another age group. There's many reasons why the load might be high. And we'll flag that and just say, we need to sort of stabilise that load in the coming week, just so he's not at a consistent period of high loading week to week, especially around them players who are sort of growing. So we don't want them growing a significant amount and then also having that much load going through them on a week to week. It can sort of increase the risk of injury for us as practitioners. So just flagging them up really week to week and ensuring that there's no sort of consistent high loading, but also that there's no peaks and troughs, so there's no big spike in loading and then it comes right back down to a low load and then comes back up the week after into a big spike. You know, that's also a sort of thing we're trying to look at to decrease injury risk especially in our youth athletes.
Yeah, okay. I think one thing that for me, because I don't track my loads with my coaches and whatnot, I have Whoop. I'm sure you probably have heard of Whoop
Yeah.
And you can see your state of training, and this is relating to terms of like a maintenance kind of level or overreaching level or even restorative level. And something that I can see quite consistently is that I'm in a state of overreaching, which is meaning that, okay, you know, I'm probably a little bit more susceptible to injuries than if I was in a lower state. But that's kind of relating to being at a level of my recovery is lower than my strain every single day. So what I kind of see that as is that my risk of injury is higher than others, but also I try and counteract that with other methods, which of course we'll speak about in the following kind of topics. But what I really want to actually understand is, you mentioned there about how you don't want your players to go from a very high spike to a very low spike back to a very high spike. Is this because that creates a degree of inconsistency which can alter the body's ability to actually deal with the levels of strain or overreaching? Why is that an issue?
So it's just in case of, so if we're constantly going from a high load back to a low load, the body might not be conditioned to do that. So we can go from a period, we want athletes at points in the season to sort of go into overreaching state, so the body can adapt to the stimulus and then we can push that athlete on physically. But if they're constantly going from high to low to high to low, not really a chance to adapt to that sort of stimulus, if that makes sense. So at points in the season we will push our athletes, so they will have a consistent few weeks of high volume so the body can adapt to that stimulus, get stronger, get quicker, etc. And then they are less susceptible to injury because the body has adapted to them demands. But if we're constantly going from a high load to a low load to a high load week to week, I wouldn't say that the body's sort of getting that chance to adapt to that stimulus. It's going up, going high, coming back down low, and then if it's going high again, I would say that's sort of making us more susceptible to injury. We're not really recovering from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So when you've got athlete for let's say they're at a constant state of overreaching, does that actually mean, if we were to compare one player to another, of course there's going to be individual differences, but let's say statistically speaking, just pure statistics, let's say these two players are doing very, very high loads at an overreaching state. Statistically, are these players as likely as the other to be at a heightened chance of getting injured? Or is it, let's say, completely dependent on whether this person is more susceptible to the injury, whether it's they've adapted to being at a high strain or a high level over time, and this person is more stagnant previously, and then maybe more susceptible to injuries? Is this something where you can kind of statistically guess or estimate if someone is more susceptible to an injury in a state of overreaching, or is it purely individual?
I would say it's individual, so there's a lot of factors that go into it. You know, where is that player at in terms of their growth, previous injury risk, etc. But if we're just looking at two athletes purely and they're both the same sort of athlete, no previous injury risk, both at the same sort of periods of growth, and one athlete has had like a higher chronic workload, so over time they are at a higher workload compared to the other athlete, I would say he is less susceptible to injury because his body's adapted to the stimulus. So if he does experience, say, a spike in his acute loads, maybe a week where he's very high, but he's also been high the last 4 weeks, he's adapted to it. He's able to withstand that spike a bit more than the athlete who's probably been low the last few weeks, and then sort of has that spike in loading, who hasn't adapted to it and he hasn't really had any stimulus to push him. So the person who's probably had the higher chronic workload is probably more resistant to injury than the player who's lower in that chronic workload.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. That's actually an aspect I've never even thought about, so maybe why I haven't really been injured much. I think that the adaptation of being at an overreaching state, maybe it's more of a progressive thing where over time, I've been able to step it up each week by week, month by month. Maybe that's a progressive overload where I've been able to, progressively overload my adaptive ability to dealing with higher strain. That would, to me, thinking about it right now, it makes complete sense because, thinking about going to the gym, you're always trying to overload and to improve each session, each week, that does make complete sense. So I think that what I kind of want to highlight is the main way that we are susceptible to injuries is that primarily through a change of, I guess it's not necessarily even a change. It's more of an inconsistent measurement of training loads. Is that kind of the main way that we would see an athlete get injured? Obviously, in respects to their individual circumstance at the time, whether they're growing, whether they're not eating enough, whether they're these external things. Is this kind of the main way that we can see athletes getting injured?
Yeah, so I'd say fluctuation in like your training load, so rapid spikes and then rapid decreases, I'd say is one of the main reasons we'll see an increased injury risk in players. So we see it all the time in our academy. So some players who may have been on holiday for a couple of weeks and then they come back and they come right back into the program in a full training week. Haven't done nothing for 2 weeks, they've been on holiday for 2 weeks and then they come back into a full-time program. A lot of the time you will see them pick up injuries, whether that's just a minor muscle injury, a niggle, or anything like that, because they've done nothing for 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and they come back in and they're right back into a full-time program. And just the body sort of deconditioned over them 3 weeks, and then they're expected to come in and hit the ground running straight away, really. So yeah, I'd say that's one of the reasons. If you're not looking at any external factors and we're just purely looking at training loads and fluctuations in training loads, I would say that's one of the main factors in injury risk.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's, again, that really kind of changes my perspective on I guess even for myself, as I mentioned. I think, yeah, the main part that I think our listeners can take away is it's keeping a consistent level rather than fluctuating. That's an important thing. And when I'm thinking about it now to how my team even does it, I think that what really shocked me, I'm not too sure what the situation is in England, but in Germany, pretty much every single team in the match day +1, we have training, which to me is something that I never understood. I think that maybe in some teams in England, like you have the players who didn't play or the reserves and whatnot, they have a +1 session. That makes complete sense. Yeah. But for our match day, our starters, they also train. Not much, but they also train. And for me, that's actually, I thought that was quite surprising because in Australia, we never did that. It's like every time, it's as soon as you finish a game, you rest. And then you have the day off, and then you're back in on the Monday and you're doing a match day +1 session and you're kind of increasing the load and then decreasing towards game day. But maybe do you think that maybe a reason why, and I don't even know the reason why we do it in Germany, but I believe that it's a consistent thing across all clubs, is the reason for a +1 session is that maybe because they want to, obviously when you think of a training week, you start lower, you kind of peak, and then you go tailor it down a little bit. Do you think that maybe the reason for a +1 session could be to try and keep that level consistent? So then going, because the +1 session for our starters is not an intense session. It's a few. Yeah. It's basically just running, really, and it's not it's not baseline. It's not complete rest, but it's enough activity. It's, I guess, a form of active recovery. Do you think that might be in there to, prevent that massive spike in a week?
Yeah, so sometimes we will do that in here. So on a +1, we'll get the lads in. Could be just a light jog around the pitch, some recovery methods, stretching, foam rolling, pool work. In terms of what you're saying about, so if it doesn't make that rapid spike, I'm not too sure on that. What I would say is I think it is good to get them in on a +1 though, because you don't know what players are going to do away from the building, if that makes sense. So it's good enough, so at least as a practitioner, okay, we've got them in the building, we're sort of running their recovery session, we're sort of running what they're doing on that day. So you never know what players could do. They could go out and have a game of footy with the mates after the game, day before, after the game, so not really recovering in that way, are they? So in terms of getting them in the building, at least you know yourself, okay, they're doing this for the recovery. I've got them on the bikes, I've got them a light jog, a light stretch, whatever that may be. So that could be one of the reasons as to why in Germany they do that. At least they know themselves as a practitioner what them players are doing on a +1, rather than sending them home and saying, look after your own recovery, and you don't really know what players would do. So.
Yeah, that actually does make a lot of sense thinking about it now. For me, it was quite a shock, honestly. Like when we had, I moved to a club in the winter transfer window, and I was with the first team, and I thought that, professionals, just take the day off as soon as you can after a match. But yeah, it definitely puts it into perspective for me. I mean, for me, because I do try to take accountability for everything I can, it was a no-brainer for me to do my own recovery stuff on a +1, or rest on a +1 and do that the normal way. But for people who maybe need to be in a tailored environment where they need to have an external source of accountability like that, I think obviously it's always going to be individualized, and I think that definitely is a good way to keep it consistent for all players either.
So especially our youth athletes, so working with the YDP, one of the challenges we have when we're trying to manage our training loads week to week, we know what they're doing here in the building, so we know what they're doing out on the pitch. We've got GPS on them when they're going out on the pitch, etc. We know what they're doing in the gym, but on the days off, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know if they're going to have another 90-minute game of football with the school team, or they're going to play football with the mates. So it's one of the challenges we do find here. How do we sort of take that into account? We haven't got a figure as to what they're doing out of here. We've got a figure as to what they're doing in here. We know what they're doing in here. We've got a value for that, but it could be something outside the building that they're doing that sort of leads to an injury or anything like that. We just don't know what they're doing. It's one of the challenges we've experienced this year, with players doing other things, maybe doing private coaching, maybe getting a personal trainer or whatever it may be, going in the gym and doing their own thing away from here. So that's one of the things I think probably could be the reason as to why you're coming in on a +1. The coaches don't know what the players are doing on a +1. Just so at least they know for peace of mind what they're doing.
Yeah. As I said, it makes sense thinking about it now. The next kind of topic that we want to go into, so it's about injury prevention, and we kind of already spoke about I wouldn't say a proactive method to prevent injuries, but it's kind of a active way of preventing injuries is the consistent level of strain, load, that kind of terminology. So that's a very active way to manage injury prevention. But we kind of want to talk about a proactive way of injury prevention. So from making a personal anecdote for me, right, a very active way that I've established my injury prevention is having quite a consistent load. And that's, I would say, very down to my tracking ability on Whoop. Because I try and get a strain of at least 16 plus every single day for training, and that's a very easy way for me to manage my load over time, because Whoop is a consistent metric that is measured through heart rate and things like this and duration. So for me, that's quite an easy thing to measure. Maybe it's not easy for people who don't have these tracking capabilities, but for me, I do. But to go into a more proactive way of injury prevention, what are the main injuries that athletes are susceptible, and at a young age, especially with a lot of our listeners being young and growing, what are the main susceptible injuries that footballers are accustomed to?
The main one probably that comes to mind is hamstring injuries. They're probably the most prevalent in football, especially at first team level. But for youth athletes, we've had a few cases here recently. Stress fractures, so as people are growing, people are going into peak height velocity and things like that. On top that, they're already experiencing, stress fractures has become pretty prevalent here, whether that be lower back, pelvic stress responses, etc. They're probably the main ones that we've seen in the academy this year and over the last couple of years, and the ones that we've sort of been trying to manage more and more at the minute. So yeah, youth athletes probably still hamstring is still probably one of the main ones. It's one of the key muscle groups in football. But stress fractures is definitely one, I would say. With athletes growing, everyone's growing at different rates. So
Yeah. Is the reason why we are susceptible as footballers to hamstring injuries because of the high amount of high intensity sprints that we do? Because from what I have experienced myself, whenever I work on my hamstrings, whether I'm doing my own injury prevention work or if I'm doing with the strength and conditioning coach, if I am to do sprints that evening or that training session prior or the next day, I always find that my hamstrings hurt 10 times more because I did the strength work previously, and maybe that isn't allowing my hamstrings to recover, which is then almost counterintuitive to me doing those exercises in the first place. Is that why footballers are so susceptible to strengthening our hamstrings?
So hamstrings injuries, the main two sort of mechanisms of the injury probably are coming from sprinting or that sort of stretching action. If you're stretching for the ball, you're striking the ball, etc. When the hamstrings are coming under high eccentric demands, it's when they're more susceptible to injury. So one of the things that we do here especially is hamstring strengthening is one of our main sort of philosophies in our gym, where trying to strengthen them eccentrically, whether that be Nordics, things like that, isometrically, just trying to target the hamstrings really. But yeah, it's probably why you are feeling your hamstrings when you sprint. They're coming under high eccentric forces when they are sort of in that sprinting action, and that's why we are susceptible to injury at times, especially as footballers.
Yeah, I know that when I was at Sydney, I think that one of the most common injuries, we were a bit older, so we were kind of past the typical stress fracture age, but a lot of the players, we were getting meniscus tears and ACLs, and I actually had a meniscus tear myself, and I put that down to me actually doing, and this was coming out of lockdown, and during lockdown, I got addicted to doing 10-kilometer runs, and there was just something about it. I loved this one. I was doing it every second day, but I realized that was just, it wasn't very smart, and I continued to do this, and I found that with doing a lot of passing and kicking mixed with the range of motion of, obviously with a 10-kilometer run, it's a very high load on all muscle joints, and then I was running on roads, so that's obviously going to do even more impact. I found that through the academy, Sydney FC's academy, and then through my own personal experiences, the meniscus tears and the ACL tears were actually quite common. What is that reason for that being such a prevalent and also quite a damaging injury for footballers?
We don't really see, so we had a couple of meniscus here, a couple of ACL this year. Some of the main factors I would say myself is probably some of your poor proprioception, neuromuscular control, the key, the mechanisms of an ACL, when you land and things like that. If you've got poor control of that movement, poor control of your body weight, that can lead to things like your ACL, things like that. So some of the stuff we try and do in the gym, especially with our younger athletes, even with our older athletes, PDP, things like that, is sort of trying to get them to handle their own body weight, whether that be jump and land and things like that, landing on unstable surfaces, getting them used to sort of the feel of controlling their own body weight, maybe no load involved, just pure body weight, because when you're out on the pitch, there's no load involved, it's all your body weight. You've got to manipulate your own body, you've got to sort of land on your own body, control your own body in them sort of circumstances. And so by doing it in a controlled environment, where you're sort of trying out these movements, you're getting used to the feel of your body, how you're landing, the stability all around your knee, hip, ankle. If you're sort of getting that in the gym work in your controlled environments, you're better off out on the pitch, which it's not controlled, as you know. It's not a controlled environment. But if you're poor in the gym where it is a controlled environment, handling your own body weight, and then you go out onto the pitch and you can't handle your own body weight, whether that's landing, jumping, etc. I think that's probably one of the main reasons as to why we see things like your ACLs.
Yeah, okay. I think that from what the ACL injuries that I've seen, it's typically people decelerating. And I think that I remember one of our players, we were doing a deceleration sprint exercise where like this exercise is purely for trying to experience the load, as you said, like in a controlled environment to prevent ACLs. And I think I remember actually a player tearing the ACL doing that, which I guess is probably in a true.
It can happen. It's like sometimes you just like you can hold your hands up as you're trying to do things to sort of mitigate that risk. It can happen. Football's unpredictable at times, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe aspect of that was probably our pitch at the time was shocking. So there's another external factor of, the deceleration being affected. But with those kind of points, so the next injury that we haven't addressed is the stress fractures. Now, I've had 2 stress fractures myself. A lot of my friends have had stress fractures in their L5. Another close friend of mine at the time, he actually had 2 stress fractures in his shin. In his foot. And that one was a very weird one. But that one was, so obviously with a stress fracture, it's typically because, with growing, it can mean, your muscles are growing at different rates. Maybe your strength isn't growing at the necessary need for your body's load. Therefore, let's say your calves aren't strong enough. So then, the weight's distributed to your quads and your thighs. Then your legs aren't strong enough, and then it goes to your glutes. Maybe your glutes aren't strong enough, and the next thing it gets to is your back, and then you have all of this stress on your back on top of you still growing. And this is how the athletes can get injured. Now, when you're growing and at the same time you're playing football, it's very difficult to, let's say if you're going quite fast, which in my case I was growing quite fast. I think I grew maybe 30 centimeters in like a year or so. And for me to actually prevent that injury, I would have had to be either doing much less football work, I would imagine, or doing more strength work previously and during to have those building blocks and barriers to prevent, because let's say all of my body parts before it got to my back couldn't deal with that amount of stress. How do you build up that load whilst growing so fast?
For me, with stress fractures, it's not as much strength for me, but more like mobility. So as you're growing, as you know, probably if you're growing at a very fast rate, your joints, so your hips, your back, knees, ankles are all stiffening up because you're growing at such a rate that your body's trying to cope with this new structure essentially. So some of the things we do in our gym work, especially around 14, 15, where these lads are experiencing high rates of growth, is trying to focus on a lot of mobility work. Mobilise the hips, mobilise the ankles, the knees, etc. Just so all them are mobile. So when they get out onto the pitch, they're able to move in a way which is sort of efficient. So as they're moving out on the pitch, it's efficient. As they're moving in the gym, it's efficient. So not all the stress is going on the lower back. They're moving in an efficient way. Strength does come into it, absolutely, I agree. But I would say more mobility in them key areas, your hips especially, sorry. As you know, probably you'd experience it yourself when you're growing. You probably start to stiffen up in them key areas, and that can sort of lead to things like your stress fractures. And sometimes it's, you could do everything where you've managed the loading well, you've done everything perfect, and just because they're growing, it can happen. Stress fractures can just happen naturally as a result of you growing at a quick rate. There is things that you can put in place to sort of try and mitigate that risk, which we do here. We measure our athletes every 6 weeks just to see where they're at in terms of the peak height velocity, and sort of modify their program based on that. So if people are going into peak height velocity, they're sort of on our list to sort of flag up and manage their loading on a week to week, just because we know they're growing at a quick rate. And even then, sometimes they can come out with a stress response or a stress fracture. It's just sometimes you've got to hold your hands up and say, listen, you grow at a quick rate, and it happens sometimes, So yeah, I'd say probably mobility is probably the key area I would say to focus on during that period of peak growth, because everything's growing at a quick rate. You see that adolescent awkwardness at times with people growing. You can't really move. But I think that's probably more your mobility more than your strength.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, even thinking about the activities that I was doing at the time when I had the stress fracture, it was actually a hip flexor and I forgot the muscle group, but it was you know the exercise when you're on one knee and you have your leg fully extended out in front of you and you're going back and forth, and it's the hip flexor stretch. I don't really remember what the right term was, but I remember that I was doing this one stretch for around 20 minutes, about 10 minutes on each side. It was like 2 minutes on, 30 seconds rest, 2 minutes on again, and it was the most boring time of my life just doing this stretch for so long. And I really found though that this actually made me realize how important stretching was, being flexible. And I mean, as I said, with the goalkeeping aspects, it's something that maybe I'm a bit more accustomed to because of the need of being flexible as a goalkeeper, because you need to be flexible to save some balls. But it was boring, but it definitely really built a fundamental building stone, I guess you could say, for even the approach that I have today with injury prevention alongside, because now I hope I haven't stopped growing completely. I'm 18, so maybe but I would like to grow a little bit more. It would be helpful. But yeah, I think that now as an older athlete, I've kind of shifted towards the strength aspect a little bit more. Obviously, so with the young listeners who are listening now, I think that it's important to address the importance of the stretching and the mobility, because when you are growing so rapidly, as we mentioned with my own case, growing so rapidly, you can't really have a strength program in there to counteract statistically every month you're growing maybe 2 centimeters. You don't really have a way to counteract that ability of strength. So in that case, it must be the best way to counteract is through mobility and stretching, right?
I think definitely around our ages, I would say less focus on your strength and more focus on movement quality. So quality of movement in the gym, quality of movement out on the pitch. You'd obviously touch on your strength work at times, but I wouldn't say that's the main aspect of your training. And I think it would be definitely your quality of movements, or your mobility work, quality of your squat patterns, things like that. And then that'll translate out on the pitch. You'll be a better mover. You move more efficiently out on the pitch then, and then you're less likely to get injured. And then once you pass that sort of period of peak height velocity, I would say then you can start to shift your focus onto your strength and your power work, a lot more than you would be during that period of peak height, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that takes us into kind of the final kind of thing that I want to address there, which is the injury prevention in terms of, let's say, a more developed athlete in age where they have stopped probably growing the majority of their height, I guess you could say, and they're like, for me, for example, I would, as I said to you previously, where my injury prevention, I'd spend 2 gym sessions focusing on injury prevention, from doing my Nordics, where I know that I need to build up hamstring strength, to doing my reverse Nordics, which is more of a mobility exercise. And there's a degree of strength needed for reverse Nordic, but I'd say that it's not nearly as much strength needed as a normal Nordic. But yeah, I think that what are the main areas that we can work on as a older athlete in terms of injury prevention?
Definitely. So for me, as being a strength and conditioning coach, all your strength work in them key areas, your hamstrings, quads, glutes, all of them, strengthening them, bulletproofing them in the gym. So when you're out on the pitch, you're able to withstand the forces that you're going to produce out on the pitch. If you can't do a full Nordic, or you can't do a Nordic in the gym, and then you're expected to go out on the pitch and sprint maximally, your hamstrings aren't robust enough to sort of cope with them forces, and that's what can lead to injury. So definitely gym work, I would say, being a strength and conditioning coach, is probably the main thing that I would say for an athlete to do. All your strength work, all your movement work, not just strength, it's again, it's still your movement quality. You could have all the strength in the world, and if you're not an efficient mover, that can also lead to injury. And then when we're going on to when we were speaking about ACLs previously, you know, all your stability work, all your landing work, landing mechanics in the gym, you know, doing all them in a controlled environment in the gym, getting better at that, getting better stability around your hip, your knee, your ankle within the gym, serves you better on the pitch when it's not controlled. You know, you're having to land in all different ranges of motion, different planes, etc. So for me, being an S&C coach, they're probably the main things that I focus on with our players. And then there's all your other things, you know, like you're stretching your mobility, making sure you're doing everything properly on the pitch in your warm-ups, etc. Making sure you're ready for the session ahead. But as a sort of pre-training sort of thing, not just out on the pitch, sort of in the gym, I would say definitely your strength work in all them key areas, your key muscle groups, and then quality of movements, making sure you're an efficient mover, making sure you're a proper athlete, really, making sure you're athletic enough and developed enough to withstand the demands of the sport, and you can do that both on the pitch and both in the gym.
Yeah, okay. For me, being in Australia and even just hearing your personal anecdotes from the high level that you're at in Everton, it kind of makes me realize how the difference of attention and expertise and education for some of the players at Everton compared to the players in Australia. You know, as I said, with Sydney FC being one of the better teams in Australia, and thinking about how, I mean, all credit to our strength and conditioning guy. He's a great guy, and he was very helpful, but he was a one-man team, and he had to deal with 60 players, and I think that's such a difficult job. You can't really tailor the needs to 60 different players, and he did his he worked his way around it, you know, putting people into different groups according to their different test results and things like this. But it makes it very difficult for players who aren't at the high level of Premier League club to access these people like you who are so educated in these areas. And even just for me, myself, thinking about my own strength and conditioning plan, I am only self-educated, I'd say, in this area. Obviously, I have some guidance from my S&C, but my S&C in my current club at Bayreuth, which is the 3rd division team in Germany, unfortunately, we can't hire him as a full-time strength and conditioning coach, so we only see him once a week. And he's there for all of our warm-ups, but as the goalkeepers, we go warm up ourselves. So I only see him once a week in the gym. And for me, that's not easy. It's definitely not easy for him as well, because if we want to work together, you know, there's a relationship there, but there's no back and forth too much. It's more of a weekly thing. And what I want to get with this is, for an athlete who's not at that top level, who's not at a Premier League club, who's not in a professional environment, how do they start educating themselves on the necessary areas of which they need to work on? Because I think that for me, the areas that I've done the most research on in strength and conditioning comes from the wrong source. It's all about like the bodybuilding people who are just normal day-to-day gym goers. Like I've realized in the past few weeks, even I am basically training myself to become like a bodybuilder, and I'm not actually showing that I'm looking like a bodybuilder or anything, because I think the amount of strength that I have, it definitely doesn't look like I would be that strong for my physique, which is probably due to the hypertrophy level that I have, where it's like I also do a lot of mobility and stretching, so that probably kind of decreases the and then also a lot of like running and things like this. This probably doesn't give me the optimal amount to see the maximal results from, which as a footballer I don't want to be a bodybuilder, you know. But for someone who can only access really the strength and conditioning side of bodybuilding, how do we actually start to educate ourselves, other than listening to this podcast? How do we start to educate ourselves on the necessary aspect of strength and conditioning for footballers?
There's plenty of research out there. So if you're looking at sort of just injury prevention alone, there's plenty of research to say, okay, what's the main prerequisites or causes of hamstring injury risk? And as we know, as footballers, they're probably your key muscle groups, your hamstring and glutes. So if you just do a simple search on Google, have a little look at the research, and you say, okay, so eccentric hamstring strength is probably one of the key areas of injury risk. So low levels of eccentric strength results in an increased risk of injury in your hamstring. And then just go from there, really. There's plenty of resources on Instagram, on LinkedIn, as you know yourself. There's a lot of different things on LinkedIn, different SEC coaches working in football, putting all sorts of ideas and things on LinkedIn. I'm probably not as good on LinkedIn at the minute, to be fair, but something I need to get better at. But there's loads of resources out there if you have a look. And if you're interested in the research yourself, have a look at the research, read the research, ask yourself, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of my own injury prevention programming? You know, what are the causes of injury? How do I sort of counteract them within my own gym program? And then go from there, really.
Yeah, I think that a really good point that you mentioned there was the LinkedIn part, because, I mean, from thinking about the current people who I have around me, fortunately, and this is probably due to my own doing, the people who I am with and speak to the most are through LinkedIn. So
yeah,
my environment's a little bit tailored to myself. But outside of that, when I'm thinking of people from school and things like this, when I was back in Australia, not one person even knew what LinkedIn was. But I think it's such a great tool for anyone actually trying to educate themselves in the right areas, because so many professionals in all areas of life, business, sports, and things like that are on LinkedIn, and they're actually sharing this information to other people, which is such a great tool. Yeah, I see a lot of great content on LinkedIn where it's people in. I see a lot of work with one guy in Belgium, actually, with Ghent, I believe, and some of the stuff there it's amazing, and it's all there for you. He's got a great book as well, and there's a lot of information out there for people to actually educate themselves on, which, as I said, even thinking about it before, I didn't even realize how great of a source LinkedIn can be for such great information. And I think that for our listeners right now, just create a LinkedIn account, go connect with all the strength and conditioning coaches, connect with some coaches whilst you're there, grow your network, because it's such an important tool. And as I discussed with you, Kai, just before we started the episode, I mean, for me, LinkedIn's been able to get me to yourself. It's been able to get me to teams in Europe. I think that it's such a great tool for players to start taking accountability, start educating, start growing your network. And I think that, definitely that's a great way to start educating the areas of which you can start to work on. And then also, as you mentioned, with incorporating it into the gym session, the three injuries that we mentioned before, so the hamstring, the ACL, and the stress fractures. So if we were to think of that, if I was to start incorporating that into my own gym regime, whether it's completely individual or it's with my team, then I could start to figure out what exercises I need to adapt and start doing. Now, what I want to ask you specifically, and this is actually even a very personal question, because as I started to think about, is the strength and conditioning plan that I'm doing the right one, I was thinking, and I was comparing to my teammates who do absolutely nothing in the gym, but in the preseason they do a lot. Maybe they do a bit of work. That's probably a discredit to them. But they don't do nearly as much as I do in the gym. When I go every day, I go to training before anyone else gets there, and I do my own gym exercises. How often should we actually be doing strength work as footballers?
So, like you're saying there, you've got to give your body a chance to adapt to the stimulus. So going every day and doing max strength work probably isn't the best idea. Here at Everton, we probably do it. So with our 21s age group, we probably do somewhere four gym sessions a week. But then again, it could be a lower upper split. So we're not smashing lowers every day. We're giving our body a chance to adapt to the stimulus that we just put on it, the stresses we just put on it within the gym session. So I love the attitude of you wanting to be in the gym all the time, you wanting to sort of get better, but you've also got to give yourself a chance to adapt to that sort of stimulus that you've just put on yourself in the gym. So yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. It is interesting because, so what I do for myself is I do 2 strength days where I'm focusing on higher weight, lower reps, and then I do an explosive day of upper and then lower. So it's a 2-day. So Monday, Tuesday, and my strength days, uppers and lowers. Monday. So lowers.
There's Monday, lowest Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then on Thursday I do uppers explosive and then lowers explosive on the Friday, and then on the Wednesday and the Saturday, that's when I do my injury prevention work. So what I want to ask with that is, so with my explosive as well, it's a lower weight with low reps as well, but I'm just trying to do as many explosive
fast movements.
Yeah, exactly. As a goalkeeper, that's probably more important than other positions, because you want to be training fast movements as a goalkeeper. With that, what are the typical durations of your strength and conditioning work that you do at Everton? Is that an hour? Is that 45 minutes? Is it half an hour? Like, what's the typical duration?
Scheduling wise, so especially with our younger ages, we only get 2 30 to 40 minute gym slots, so we do our gym before training. It's just because of scheduling, kids coming from school, coming straight into the program, we don't have time to have a full hour or hour 20 with them really, but it's enough. So especially at the younger ages, we don't really focus on max strength work, high weight, low reps. We sort of focus on speed of movements and quality of movement, so it'll be low load, but we're doing everything with maximal intent, so the movements are quick, trying to get our athletes to be more explosive, to translate that out onto the pitch really. Even sort of PDP now at the minute, max strength work really isn't probably one of our main aims. It's probably lower load, but maximal intent with everything we're doing, so the movements are quick, so we can translate them out onto the pitch. We want our players to be quicker, more agile, things like that, and that's what we're trying to get with our gym work at the minute. But yeah, 230 minutes for our younger age groups at the minute, just because of scheduling, and then with our older ones, so 18s and 21s, we get a bit more time with them, so they'll probably do 4 sessions a week. That can roughly between 45 minutes to an hour really. That'll usually be, just because they're in the building full time at the minute. We get a lot more time with our PDP age groups.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So with your PDP age groups, and then you've got your senior age groups, what's the recovery methods of which they utilize the most? So you mentioned that did you mention you've got a pool, right? That's amazing. Gosh, what I do to make pool. So yeah, the main recovery methods that you guys use, do you do after training? Like, I know that in Germany we don't do warm downs. Like, we also barely warm up, which for me was really surprising. In Australia, even though in Australia it's more unprofessional, for some reason we were I think that one thing about Australia actually is that footballers in Australia are athletes who can kick a ball, where in Europe they're also athletes who can kick a ball, but they're people who can kick a ball turned into athletes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, in Australia we do the warm ups and warm downs pretty well, but how do you guys do it in terms of your recovery, your warm ups, your warms down? How much tension do you guys put into that aspect?
We don't really do cool downs, to be fair. We don't do them ourselves here at Everton. Our warm-ups are they are warm-ups in a way, so we'll sort of have a jog, have a stretch, our raise, mobilise, activate sort of thing, but then also they form sort of part of our athletic development. So we'll have a certain theme that we'll do on the pitch with our warm-ups, depending on what the session looks like. So if our session is bigger spaces, could be some 11v11 work, or just a bigger possession with bigger spaces, then we'll focus on our speed work. So that'll typically happen on a match day -4 maybe. So whether it's a match day -4, we'll do some speed work within our warm-ups, and that sort of again forms part of our injury prevention work. So each week we try and get our athletes to hit at least over 90% of their max speed, to sort of condition the hamstrings again, like we were mentioning before. So that our warm-ups in a way, we are getting them ready for the session, but also we take the time in our warm-ups to sort of develop our athletes in other movements. That could be your accelerations, your decelerations, your max velocity work, your agility work, things like that. And then recovery methods, So for our YDP age groups, they're usually off the day after the game, and all we were saying that, but just scheduling wise. So our under 15s will play on a Tuesday. They're always off on a Wednesday anyway, just scheduling wise. We're sort of like the nutritional strategies we get into them. We try and get them food after the game, whether that be like a grab bag, like a chicken wrap or something like that. So we know that they're getting some sort of protein in them post game. But with our PDP, it's probably a more tailored, a more structured recovery session after the game. So typically it'll be maybe like 20 minutes on the bike, getting some blood flow back into the legs, loosening them off. In the pool for some mobility, or in the gym for some mobility work, some foam rolling, stretching, whatever that may be. And then in the pool, just as a little cool down essentially after the game. They won't ever really go out onto the grass. Match day +1, sorry. Similar with our under 18s, it'll be sort of a similar structure. So all the typical recovery modalities, your foam rolling, your stretching, things like that. Yeah, that's what we usually do.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, it's a massive credit to you and your work at Everton. I think even just hearing like the amount of detail that you guys put into the players and making sure that everything's monitored. I mean, as I said, what I do for some of that, it's a different level, and I think even for our listeners,
I think we're lucky. We're lucky just because of sort of resources that we have here. We've got GPS for all our players from 13 upwards, so we are very lucky with the resources we've got. We are able to sort of monitor a lot of different things across the age groups. I know a lot of clubs aren't as lucky to have that sort of resources. So
yeah, and that's what you get at the top level. I mean, obviously there's going to be hundreds of clubs who don't have the amount of resources that you guys have, but I think it's inspiring for our listeners to even hear, that you can actually get to that level of professionalism where everything around you is nurtured to help you get the most out of your situation, which completely aligns with the message at Sculpted. Even it's you're trying to get the best out of yourself every single day, and when you've got people and like-minded individuals who are there to help sculpt yourself and become a better version of yourself, and obviously a massive part of improving is outsourcing to people who have more knowledge in areas than you do, which is why obviously Everton have you there, because if the owner of Everton was to come and run every training session of even the training sessions with the head coach, they just can't do it. So outsourcing it to people who are much more knowledgeable, it's amazing to see. And that kind of brings me into the last question we've got for you, Kai, as I'm aware of the time now. So what are 3 ways that you sculpt yourself on a daily basis, or ways that you even get your players to sculpt themselves on a daily basis?
So for our players, maybe not sort of a method, but one of the messages we do say to them is sort of maximise your time in the building. So when they are here, maximise every opportunity you've got. Every session we put on is a chance for you to grow, to get better. I know a lot of people just because they're young, they're just kids, they think they've got all the time in the world here, and realistically, you get to under 16, you're getting offered scholarships. It comes so quick for them. And it's just sort of reiterating that point. Every opportunity you've got in the building, just make the most of it. For our players, just make the most of everything that we're putting on for you. We're doing it to try and help you, to try and improve you as a player. So make the most of it. We can't push you all the time. It's sort of got to be self-led at times. You've got to take responsibility for your own development at times. You know what I mean? And then for myself, it's probably just constant reflection. I try and reflect on the day, sort of at the end of every day. What sessions have I run today? How did they go? What went well? What didn't go so well in them sessions? And then try and manipulate the next day based on them. So constant reflection really is probably the main thing that I do for myself personally. I'm sort of on, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but the BASIS pathway. It's like a sports science accreditation process that I'm currently on at the minute. And a lot of that is sort of reflecting on your practice, reflecting on what you're doing each day. Again, what went well, what didn't go so well, what would you change if you were going to do it again? And I found that to be of a massive benefit. Something that I haven't always done, but something that at the minute I'm finding is helping my practice a lot, really.
Okay. And so the main things that I kind of took from that was the responsibility and accountability that you want the players to have, which is where they are in a very fortunate situation being at such a great club like Everton and having the resources available. I think that as you mentioned, kids can take that for granted, and the time is limited. And yeah, taking that responsibility and accountability whilst they're in the environment, whilst they've got all of these facilities readily available to themselves, it's definitely an important part, and something that maybe some people don't think about when they're looking in externally. If we've got listeners now who are in England and they're thinking, and they're not at a Premier League team, and they're not even at a championship team or league below, the players who are thinking about, some of these kids might be taking it for granted, and this is hopefully, when they're in there, you want them to take extreme accountability and responsibility so that they can get the most out of it. And, hopefully we've got some of them listening to the episode now so they can realize that, we really want to maximize your results and your ability at such a privileged opportunity at this level. Taking responsibility and accountability it's a very important thing. And then also, I really liked your point on the reflection for yourself. I think that's a very important thing, because that creates self-awareness. It also gives you an action plan to where you can help improve yourself and create awareness of where, as you said, things that do go well and things that maybe didn't go so well. It's a brilliant way to help sculpt yourself, because one thing that we talk about at Sculpted is when you're in the pursuit of sculpting yourself, you're trying to get rid of as many things that hinder you as well. So whether it's that finding the things that don't work, and as we mentioned even at the beginning of the episode, that the degree of having that psychological background of understanding things that, some people might react to this well, some people might not react to this well. It's a great way to create that self-awareness to sculpt yourself on a daily basis, and it's a really great point. And yeah, I think that Kai, it was an absolute honor to have you on today, and we really appreciate
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was honestly it's a great insight to the top level of such a big club like Everton, and we really appreciate your time today and your knowledge. So yeah, thank you so much for putting the time together, and yeah, it was an excellent episode. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.